Everyone in town laughed when widowed dad Noah Green inherited a crumbling farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. But when a hidden vault inside revealed a 150 million secret hand, a fiery architect with a past no one was laughing anymore. Like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping love stories that turn pain into passion and shame into power. Noah Green stared out the driver's side window of his battered pickup, his jaw tight as the dirt road gave way to cracked pavement. His 6-year-old son, Eli, sat beside him in the booster seat, legs swinging freely, humming a song that had no tune. The farmhouse loomed ahead like a ghost, rising from the misty morning with chipped paint, boarded windows, and a sagging roofline that hinted at decades of decay. The fields surrounding it were overgrown, the weeds tall and defiant, claiming every inch of land that had once been plowed with care. It was a far cry from the tidy suburban life he had once known with Hannah, his wife, before the accident ripped her from them. After the funeral, the days had blurred into survival lunches packed with mechanical efficiency, bedtime stories told in a monotone whisper, bills paid with the dull precision of a man trying not to feel too much. Grief had a way of hollowing out everything, even pride, which might explain why Noah was now pulling up to a crumbling property he hadn't even known existed until a lawyer called 2 weeks ago. His grandfather, Walter Green, had left him the house in a will dated nearly 30 years ago. Noah barely remembered the man, just a gruff voice at the end of a phone line once a year, and the faint scent of tobacco and engine grease from a visit long before he understood what family really meant. There had been no love lost, no real relationship to mourn, but when the lawyer explained the farmhouse was Noah's free and clear, a strange sense of obligation took root. Maybe it was the idea of legacy. Maybe it was just something to do with his hands. He'd taken a leave from work, pulled Eli from school with promises of a grand adventure, and driven 7 hours across the state to claim what the rest of his family had either ignored or deemed worthless. He parked near the rusted mailbox, its hinge long broken, the name Green barely visible through layers of dirt. Eli scrambled down from the truck and took off running, his small arms out like airplane wings, laughter echoing across the field. Noah called after him but didn't chase. He knew Eli needed to stretch, to be free for a moment, and the Landigley as it was theirs now. No traffic, no neighbors, no judgment, just wild space and old secrets. The front porch creaked as he stepped onto it, every board groaning under his weight. He slid the old brass key into the lock and twisted. It stuck, of course, like everything else in his life. A solid kick did the trick, and the door swung open with a gust of dust and stale air. The scent was overwhelming old wood, mildew, something sour beneath it all. He coughed, waving his hand in front of his face, then stepped inside. The living room was frozen in time. Furniture coated in white sheets stood like forgotten statues. A faded rug lay curled at the edges, and above the mantel, a photograph of a much younger Walter in uniform gazed down with stern, haunted eyes. Noah's boots echoed against the hardwood floor as he moved through the space, peeling back sheets, opening cabinets, trying to make sense of the bones of the house. Eli darted in behind him, a blur of energy and wonder. He crouched to examine a broken clock, poked at a cobwebbed bookcase, then vanished into another room before Noah could tell him to be careful. He spent the next few hours surveying the structure. The roof would need replacing. The plumbing was likely a disaster. The wiring could probably burn the whole place down with one flipped switch. And still, he felt it the quiet challenge of redemption humming beneath every flaw. This place could be something. Maybe not a home, not right away, but a project, a purpose. The sun was starting to dip when he heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. He stepped out to find 2 women from the town standing beside a gleaming SUV, eyes narrow with curiosity thinly veiled as neighborly concern. One of them, a blonde in a floral blouse, offered a tight smile. "You must be the grandson," she said. "Didn't expect anyone would actually show up to claim this old wreck." Noah nodded, keeping his tone neutral. Planning to fix it up? The other woman let out a small laugh, loud enough to carry. Fix it? Honey, this place is more rot than house. Folks say it's haunted by debt and bad decisions. Walter was a recluse, for a reason. Their laughter stung, even if he didn't show it. He thanked them, as politely as he could manage, and they drove off still giggling, no doubt eager to share the gossip with the rest of the town. By morning, Noah knew the entire county would be talking about the single dad trying to resurrect a cursed farmhouse. That night, after Eli was asleep on the air mattress they'd brought from the truck, Noah sat alone on the back steps with a beer he'd found still cold in the cooler. The stars above were sharper out here, unspoiled by city haze, and the silence settled deep into his chest. He wasn't sure if he'd made a mistake, but he didn't regret it. Not yet. He glanced over his shoulder at the house, where a light from his lantern glowed through the window. Something about it called to him. Maybe it was the stubbornness in his blood, the same grit that kept him moving through grief, through the endless, aching days of raising a child without a partner. Maybe it was a promise he hadn't known he'd made to himself to build something new, even if it had to be from ruins. As he stood and stretched, preparing to head in, his boot caught on a loose floorboard near the back porch. He knelt and lifted it easily. Beneath was nothing but dirt, but the way the earth had shifted made him pause. He reached into the hole, brushing away loose soil. His fingers struck something hard and hollow. He froze, then scraped more frantically. He uncovered a rusted metal ring, fixed to what appeared to be a wooden hatch. His pulse quickened. A root cellar? A storm shelter? He tugged, but the hatch wouldn't budge. With the wind beginning to pick up and the moon climbing higher, he let it go for the night. He covered the spot again and stepped back into the house, locking the door behind him. Tomorrow, he'd dig deeper. The next morning, the house groaned in protest, as sunlight poured through cracks in the warped shutters, spilling across the dust-streaked floorboards. Noah rolled over on the thin mattress and squinted at the golden beams slicing through the air like blades. His back ached from sleeping on what felt like a stack of plywood and regret, but Eli stirred beside him, warm and breathing slow, and that was enough to make the morning tolerable. He rose quietly, careful not to wake the boy, and tiptoed to the small table where he'd set up their camp stove. The coffee tin was dented and nearly empty, but he managed to coax out enough for a cup. He stood by the open window, sipping, listening to the strange hush that came from being so far removed from traffic and alarms and lawnmowers. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was too thick for that, too charged. Like the air before a storm. His mind drifted back to the hatch he'd uncovered the night before. He hadn't told Eli about it. He didn't want the boy imagining monsters beneath the house. When Eli finally awoke, he wolfed down a banana and a granola bar, then ran off to explore the property again. Noah let him go, setting a loose perimeter in his head. He knew the area wasn't dangerous in the usual ways. There were no neighbors close enough to worry about, no traffic, no predators beyond maybe a snake or two, but even so, the boy's safety clung to him like a second skin. After a few hours spent organizing the front rooms and dragging old furniture onto the porch to be appraised later, Noah heard the crunch of gravel again. This time, it wasn't nosy townsfolk or curious teenagers. A pale blue pickup pulled in slowly, clean and well kept, with a logo on the side he didn't recognize. The woman who stepped out was tall, late 30s, with dark curls pinned back under a baseball cap and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She had a clipboard in one hand and a coffee in the other. She looked like someone who got things done. "You Noah Green?" she asked, not unkindly. He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow and tossing the rag over his shoulder. "I am. You're early." She smirked. "I get that a lot." He had called her 2 days ago after finding her name on a local recommendation forum. Clara Rivera. Structural consultant, former architect, now specializing in rural property restorations. He had expected someone older, maybe someone with a longer resume or a dusty pickup, but this woman walked with a stride that told him not to underestimate her. She followed him up the porch steps, eyeing the house with the same expression a surgeon might give a badly broken limb. There was no malice in it, only curiosity mixed with calculation. She took notes as she walked through the rooms, tapping the walls, pressing against beams, crouching to inspect the joists beneath the warped floors. He watched her work in silence, caught between admiration and defensiveness. It was his house now, but she moved through it like she already understood it better than he ever could. "You're not from around here, are you?" she said finally, glancing at him over her shoulder as they stood in what had once been the dining room. "No," he replied. "I grew up in the city. Spent a few years in the suburbs after I got married. This place came out of nowhere." She nodded, scribbling something. "Your grandfather was a bit of a legend, you know. Not in the flattering sense." "So I've been told," Noah said, remembering the sharp smiles and smug warnings from the day before. "Still," she added, turning to face him fully, "the bones are better than I expected. The foundation's shifted, but it's solid. There's craftsmanship here, hidden under all the decay. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." That caught his attention. "What do you mean?" She moved toward the corner of the room and rapped on a support beam with the butt of her pen. "This framing technique, the angles of the load distribution, it's not standard for a house this size. Your grandfather either paid someone very talented or built it off plans that weren't meant for a farmhouse. There's something deliberate in how it's structured, like it was meant to hide something." He tilted his head. "Hide something?" She shrugged, but her eyes gleamed with interest. "Could be nothing. Or it could be one of those old country quirks. Hidden compartments, forgotten wine cellars, bootlegging tunnels. I've seen stranger." A thrill of unease ran up his spine, mingling with curiosity. "Funny you mention that. I found something last night, out back, under a loose board." She gestured for him to lead the way, and they stepped onto the back porch, the boards groaning beneath them. He pointed to the spot, and she knelt to examine it, her fingers brushing over the edges of the wood. He watched her expression shift from professional curiosity to genuine surprise. "There's something here," she said quietly. Together they pulled the board aside and scraped at the dirt until the metal ring appeared again. She tried the hatch, pulling with effort until it gave an inch, then stuck. "It's sealed," she said, "probably swollen from years of moisture. We can't pry it without tools." They spent the rest of the day cataloging structural damage, making a list of what would need immediate attention. She was methodical and fast, asking questions about his plans, budget, how long he intended to stay. When he admitted he didn't really know, she didn't press. Instead, she focused on the work, and by sunset, the house was quieter, a little cleaner, and suddenly more full of possibility than it had been that morning. As they stood by her truck, ready to say goodbye, she pulled out a folded set of papers from her bag. "These are preliminary sketches based on what I saw. I'll refine them if you decide to move forward." He took them, surprised. "You work fast." "I don't like wasting time," she said, and for a second something behind her eyes flickered pain, maybe, or anger, or just fatigue. Whatever it was, she buried it again quickly. "Thanks for coming out," he said. "I know it's a mess, but it means something. Having someone see the value in it." She met his gaze without flinching. "You'd be surprised how many good things start as messes." Then she climbed into her truck and drove off down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the fading echo of her presence behind. Noah stood there for a moment longer, the blueprints in his hand, the porch light flickering above him, and for the first time in months, he felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope exactly, but the first breath of it. The sky hung low the next morning, heavy with gray clouds that whispered of rain. Noah stood over the hatch behind the house with a crowbar in his hand and a knot in his stomach. He had not told Eli about the hidden door, not yet. Something about it felt private, like a secret still deciding whether it wanted to be found. He had barely slept, thoughts circling in the dark like bats. The image of Clara's curious frown etched into his mind. She had seen it too, the strange design of the house, the details that didn't belong. That had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He crouched again and worked the crowbar under the edge of the hatch, gritting his teeth as the wood creaked and resisted. Water had swelled the grain, made it stubborn. With a final push, the hatch gave way with a groan, revealing a dark opening beneath. A blast of cold, musty air rolled up into his face, thick with the scent of soil and stone and something else he could not name. He backed up, took a breath, and reached for his flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, catching rough stone walls and a narrow staircase that descended into shadow. He didn't move. Not yet. His heart thumped against his ribs, a slow, steady knock that echoed louder with each second. He didn't want to go down alone. He told himself it was about safety, about being smart, but he knew better. He had spent years facing the unknown hospitals, insurance offices, courtrooms full of people offering sympathy with vacant eyes. He was not afraid of darkness, not in the usual way. But there was something ancient in the silence below, something that held its breath and waited. He closed the hatch and covered it again before heading back inside. Eli was at the table, drawing with a broken crayon on the back of a paper bag, his tongue poking out in concentration. Noah ruffled his hair as he passed, then picked up the phone and called Clara. She answered on the second ring. "You're up early," she said. "I opened the hatch," he said. There was a pause on the line. "And?" "There's a staircase. Goes underground. Looks like stone walls." She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When she arrived, she wore jeans and a fitted jacket, her hair pulled back, and boots that looked ready to march through a war zone. She carried a tool bag and a headlamp. She said little as he led her to the hatch, only nodded once when he lifted it open again, and the cold breath of the underground rose to meet them. She clicked on her headlamp and handed him a second flashlight. "Let's see what your grandfather was hiding," she said. The stairs were narrow, the air thick with damp. Noah held his breath with each step. The walls close on either side, the stone rough and uneven. The descent took longer than he expected. The stairs curved slightly, as if designed to disorient. When they reached the bottom, the flashlight beam swept across a small chamber. The walls were lined with stone, but the floor was concrete, cracked in places but still intact. At the far end stood a heavy steel vault door, thick and round, the kind you might see in an old bank. Noah whistled under his breath. "What the hell?" Clara stepped forward, running her fingers over the surface of the door. "This isn't homemade. This is industrial. Military grade, maybe. Whoever installed this knew what they were doing." The door had a wheel in the center and a panel on the side. It bore no name, no logo. Just a symbol etched in the metal, faint but still visible, a circle with 3 lines radiating outward, like sun rays or compass points. Noah frowned. "I've seen that before." Clara turned to him. "Where?" He didn't answer at first. He was already moving, climbing the stairs, his breath quickening. He burst into the living room and found Eli still drawing at the table. The boy looked up with a grin and held up his sketch. "I made a symbol, Daddy," he said proudly. Noah took it from his hands and stared. It was a rough version, but it was unmistakable. The same circle, the same rays, drawn in crayon on the back of a grocery bag. "Where did you see this?" Noah asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I saw it in a dream," Eli said, blinking. "I was in a room with walls like a cave. It was on the door. It glowed." Noah looked at Clara, who stood in the doorway behind him, her eyes sharp with thought. "It's probably just coincidence," he said, but he didn't believe it. Clara stepped forward and crouched in front of Eli. "Do you remember anything else about the dream?" Eli shook his head. "Just that it was cold, and there were boxes, like treasure." Noah felt his stomach turn. Back in the chamber, they studied the vault door again. Clara examined the panel, which turned out to be a mechanical lock rather than electronic. A small keyhole sat beneath the wheel, almost hidden in shadow. "I have an idea," Clara said. She returned to the house and rifled through one of the drawers in the old desk they had moved from the study. Inside was a bundle of keys tied with twine, each rusted with time. She brought them back, and they took turns trying them one by one. The fourth key clicked. Noah froze, then reached out and turned the wheel. It resisted at first, then gave way with a groan of metal. The door hissed as pressure shifted, and when he pulled it open, a gust of dry, stale air met them. The flashlight beams swept across the room beyond, and both of them went still. The chamber was larger than they had expected, lined with wooden crates and metal boxes. Papers were stacked in bundles, bound in leather straps. A desk sat in the corner, covered in maps and yellowed folders. Along the wall, shelves held glass jars filled with coins, small sculptures, and what looked like old currency from different countries. At the center of the room, beneath a tarp, was something rectangular and heavy. They stepped inside, the silence pressing close. Clara reached for the tarp and pulled it back. Underneath were gold bars, dozens of them, stacked in rows, stamped with foreign marks and wrapped in protective paper. Noah couldn't move. He couldn't even speak. Clara let out a low breath. "This isn't treasure," she said. "It's history." He turned slowly to look at her. "Your grandfather wasn't just hiding things," she continued. "He was protecting them." Noah leaned against the wall, his knees shaking. He thought of all the nights he had wondered if coming here was a mistake, if leaving everything behind was the wrong choice. He thought of Eli's dreams, Clara's sharp instincts, the jeers from townspeople who called him a fool. He looked around the room again, and for the first time since Hannah died, he didn't feel like he was barely surviving. He felt like something was beginning. Something dangerous and strange, yes, but also undeniable. And it was only just getting started. The next few hours passed in a haze of motion and disbelief. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor of the vault, a bundle of aged papers spread out in front of him. He kept rereading the same few pages, not because he did not understand them, but because he could not convince himself they were real. Clara knelt nearby, examining a stack of leather-bound journals with a gentleness that surprised him. She treated them the way someone might handle an injured bird, careful not to disturb anything that might crumble beneath her fingers. She had stopped speaking about an hour ago, her words giving way to silent concentration, her brow furrowed as she flipped through pages in the dim light of the portable lantern. Noah had brought it down from the truck once the batteries in their flashlights began to fade. They had not risked using electricity from the house, not yet. They were already surrounded by more mystery than either of them had planned to uncover, and neither of them was eager to discover what might short-circuit in a house this old. Noah leaned back against the wall and exhaled. The documents in his lap were old receipts and letters, but not from his grandfather's lifetime. They dated back to the late 1940s and early 1950s, some typed, some handwritten in what appeared to be multiple languages. A few were coded in strings of numbers. One sealed envelope bore the name of a Swiss bank and a stamp that read "Confidential." The meaning of the contents was obvious even before they found the note tucked beneath a stack of maps. The note was written in careful, cursive. It bore his grandfather's signature at the bottom. It explained that the vault had been built to contain a cache of valuables smuggled out of Europe after World War II. Some had been seized from private collectors who fled prosecution. Some had been acquired legally through a private preservation society, a group of former military officers and diplomats who had pledged to keep cultural artifacts and gold from falling into the wrong hands. Walter Green had been their stateside guardian. The gold bars were stamped with foreign bank seals. Some bore Nazi insignias that had been scratched out and replaced with government stamps. Clara's voice was tight when she described them, her jaw set hard. "This isn't just wealth," she said. "This is stolen history, hidden war treasure. Some of this probably belonged to families who never made it home." Noah could only nod, his thoughts racing. He looked again at the documents, then at the small sculpture on one of the shelves, a chipped marble figure no larger than a loaf of bread. Its detail was astonishing. He had no idea what it was, but it seemed to carry weight beyond its size. Everything in the room felt like that, heavy with meaning, alive with stories no one had told. "What are we supposed to do with all this?" he asked eventually, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara stood, brushing dust from her knees. "We need to document everything. Photos, notes, serial numbers. And we need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who specializes in asset law and historical restitution. This could blow up in 100 different directions if we are not careful." He nodded again, feeling the gravity of what she said, but not quite grasping the edges of it. He had been a data analyst before Hannah died. Numbers, spreadsheets, patterns. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of thing people made documentaries about, or novels, or worse, tabloid stories. By the time they sealed the vault again and climbed back into the house, the sky had shifted. The gray clouds had thickened into a ceiling of steel, and thunder rolled somewhere far off. Eli met them at the back door with wide eyes and dirty hands. He had spent the afternoon stacking rocks into a crooked tower in the front yard and trying to coax a stray cat from under the porch. He did not ask where they had been. He only asked what was for dinner. Clara stayed as the rain began to fall, her boots leaving small puddles on the floor. They boiled pasta and opened a jar of tomato sauce. Eli chattered through the meal while Noah and Clara exchanged glances between bites. The weight of the vault pressed between them like a wall neither one could name aloud in front of the boy. After Eli was tucked in, Clara stood near the kitchen window, arms folded, watching the rain streak down the glass. She did not look at Noah when she spoke. "When this gets out," she said quietly, "you are going to have people crawling all over this place. Journalists, historians, opportunists, treasure hunters. You cannot keep it quiet forever." "I know," Noah said. "You need to decide what you want. Not just for the gold, for the story, for the legacy." He joined her at the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. "I don't want any of it if it means putting Eli at risk." Her expression softened. "Then you need to take control of the story before someone else does." He had not thought about it in those terms, but it made sense. Control the story, own the narrative, decide who got to know what and when. It was not just a matter of secrecy, it was about protection, about survival. They stayed there in silence for a long while. Eventually, Clara gathered her things and said good night. She hesitated at the door before stepping into the rain. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. "We should catalog the items before anyone else finds out." He watched her walk to her truck, her figure outlined in the glow of the porch light. As the taillights disappeared into the rain, Noah sat alone on the front steps and tried to breathe. The next day brought the first crack in the quiet. A text message from his sister appeared on his phone mid-morning, asking if the rumors were true. When he asked what she meant, she said she had seen a post online, something about a hidden vault and missing Nazi gold. He felt his throat tighten. He checked his social media and found a blurry photo of him and Clara standing near the truck, with a caption that read, "What's the single dad hiding in Grandpa Green's haunted house?" There were already dozens of comments, speculation, sarcasm, accusation. Someone had seen them. Someone had been watching. Noah called Clara. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension beneath it. "Damage is done," she said. "Now we move." She contacted a friend in the city, a legal consultant who agreed to review the documents. They would need to find secure storage, maybe even bring in law enforcement. They would need to verify ownership, historical provenance, possible claimants. The media was coming. He could feel it. That afternoon, a white van rolled down the road and parked just beyond the edge of the property. A man with a camera stepped out, followed by a woman with a microphone. They did not approach the house. Not yet. But they waited, watching. Eli sat on the porch with a book, unaware. Clara stood near the window again, jaw clenched. "We don't have much time," she said. Noah nodded. He looked out at the horizon, where storm clouds still gathered, and knew that whatever calm they had left was about to vanish. What lay beneath that house was no longer a secret. It was a story now, and stories had a way of running faster than the truth. The rain did not let up for 3 days. It battered the old shingles like fists, leaking through the attic and pooling in the hallway by the back stairs. Noah placed pots and buckets to catch the steady drips, each plink a reminder of how fragile the house still was, no matter what secrets it held. Clara came every morning like clockwork, clipboard in one hand, hair tucked under a beanie, and eyes sharpened by purpose. They worked together cataloging every item from the vault, photographing the gold bars, scanning the papers, making digital backups of everything they could. Neither of them spoke about the reporters parked down the road or the whispers swelling online. The town had already turned their arrival into a spectacle. The story had spread like gasoline catching flame. Treasure in the farmhouse, Nazi gold, secret vault, single dad, mysterious woman. By the end of the week, someone had mocked up a fake movie poster and shared it across social media. Noah tried to laugh, but the weight of it all pressed harder on his chest with each passing hour. One evening, after Eli was asleep and the dishes from dinner had been dried and stacked, Clara sat across from Noah at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. She stared at the flickering lantern that lit the room in soft amber tones. Her voice was quiet when she finally broke the silence. "You ever wonder what your grandfather was running from?" Noah looked up from the folder he had been reading. "All the time. He built that vault like he expected someone to come looking. Not like he was hiding it from the world, like he was hiding it from a specific person." Noah nodded slowly. "He was a loner. That's what people say. Barely spoke to anyone. Always kept to himself. I used to think it meant he just didn't care about people. Now I wonder if he was trying to protect something bigger than himself." Clara leaned back in her chair. "If that's true, it makes this more than a discovery. It makes it a legacy, and legacies come with consequences." He watched her carefully, noticing the way her fingers toyed with the rim of her glass, the way her shoulders stayed tense, even in stillness. She had not spoken much about her own life, not really. Just bits and pieces. An architectural firm in New York, a scandal she never explained, a reputation left behind in exchange for a quieter life. "Why did you really come back here?" he asked. She did not answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the window where the storm winds still pressed against the glass. "I needed to disappear," she said finally. "After the firm collapsed, I got blamed for things that weren't mine to carry. I was angry. I was stupid. I spoke out when I should have kept quiet, and no one stood up for me. So I left." Noah nodded. "And then you found me." She gave a faint smile. "Or you found me." They sat in the quiet again, the sound of the wind and the distant creaking of the house filling the space between them. "I don't think you're a screw-up," he said. "If anything, you're the only one who seems to know what the hell to do around here." Her eyes met his, the flicker of a challenge in them. "I'm just good at acting like I do." He leaned forward slightly. "Well, it's convincing." Before she could respond, a sharp noise split the air. Wood splintering. A heavy thud. They both jumped to their feet. Noah grabbed the flashlight from the counter and raced toward the back door. Clara followed, heart pounding. The door was still locked. The yard was empty, the rain falling steady in the darkness. But something was wrong. The shed to the left of the house stood wide open, the lock twisted and dangling from its frame. Noah moved fast, flashlight beams swinging into the space. Shelves had been knocked over. Tools were scattered. A crowbar lay on the floor. Clara crouched near the corner where muddy footprints tracked inward and back out. Someone was here, recently. Noah's stomach clenched. They were looking for the vault. He ran back inside, straight to Eli's room. The boy was still asleep, one arm flung over his head, mouth open in a soft snore. Relief hit him so fast and hard it made him dizzy. Clara stood in the doorway, watching. "We need to take this seriously," she said. "This is a warning." They stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the windows, waiting for another sound that never came. When the sun finally rose, pale and weak behind the clouds, Noah called the sheriff. The deputy who arrived was young, polite, and clearly overwhelmed. He took notes, nodded a lot, and promised to increase patrols. But it was clear that without proof, or an actual confrontation, there was little he could do. Later that afternoon, Noah took Eli into town for groceries. People stared as he walked through the store. Some offered small nods or half smiles. Others looked away quickly. The attention made his skin crawl. At the checkout counter, a man in a flannel shirt stepped close and clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Quite the fortune you've stumbled into," the man said, smiling. "Hope you remember who your neighbors are when the dust settles." Noah forced a tight smile and said nothing. He drove home in silence, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Back at the house, Clara met him on the porch with a piece of paper in her hand. Her face was pale. "This was in the mailbox," she said. Noah took the paper. It was plain, folded once. No envelope. Inside, a typed message read, "You don't know what you're sitting on. Walk away while you still can." There was no signature. Noah stared at the words, his jaw clenched. Eli came running up behind him, oblivious, asking for cookies. Noah folded the note and slipped it into his back pocket. He turned to Clara and nodded toward the front door. "We need to talk." She followed him inside, her expression unreadable. In the living room, he pulled out the note again and set it on the table. "We're in this now," he said, "whether we wanted to be or not." She nodded slowly. "Then we do it right. We finish the documentation, we secure the house, and we figure out who sent this." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not just the architect, not just the advisor or the friend. He saw the partner, the one who had chosen to stay. "I can't do this without you," he said. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "Then you won't." And just like that, they began again. Not with the mystery, not with the vault, but with something quieter, something stronger. They began with trust. The sun had returned at last, a hard, bright light that cut through the last of the storm clouds and dried the puddles that had pooled in the yard for days. It streamed through the windows of the old farmhouse, touching every dust-covered surface with a strange kind of warmth. The floorboards glowed in the light, and the walls seemed less tired, as if the house had drawn a breath after weeks of holding it in. Noah stood in the kitchen, staring at the note they had received the night before. The paper now lay flat under a heavy mason jar, its message simple but charged with implication. Someone out there knew. Someone had not only been watching, but had chosen to warn them, or threaten them, or both. The line between those intentions had started to blur. He had barely slept. His body ached from the weight of too many thoughts and not enough answers. Across the kitchen, Clara was on the phone with her friend in the city, a legal consultant named Rhea, who was helping verify the provenance of the vault's contents. She paced slowly as she spoke, her tone clipped and professional. "Yes, we cataloged everything. We have serial numbers, documentation, dated letters. No, we have not moved anything out of the house yet. No press, no third parties. It's still contained." She glanced at Noah and nodded slightly, then ended the call and slipped her phone into her pocket. "She's going to reach out to the Historical Preservation Office," Clara said. "She thinks some of the artifacts could be tied to missing collections from the war. If they can identify them, it will make your case stronger when it comes to legal ownership. But it also means the spotlight gets brighter." Noah nodded and rubbed the back of his neck. "You mean more people looking into what's out here?" She crossed her arms. "Exactly. If even one of those items is on an international list of stolen property, that vault could become a jurisdictional mess. You might not own any of it legally. And once that gets out, every headline will say you're hoarding treasure that doesn't belong to you. He stared out the window toward the gravel road where the reporters had parked the week before. They had not come back, but others had. Curious townsfolk, strangers pretending to be hikers or utility workers. A car had even pulled into the driveway yesterday and sat idle for 10 full minutes before driving away. He could feel the town closing in like a slow tide. I grew up thinking no one in this place would remember my name, he said quietly. Now everyone wants to be my best friend. Clara gave him a sympathetic look. Small towns always remember. They just wait until it benefits them to admit it. That afternoon, Noah took Eli to the local hardware store to pick up more supplies. The house needed new locks and maybe a few cameras. Not because he was paranoid, but because the evidence was growing that someone wanted in. The manager behind the counter greeted Noah with exaggerated friendliness, asking if he had any big plans for all that newfound money. Noah smiled tightly and kept his answers vague. Eli chattered beside him, excited about a new flashlight, unaware of the sideways glances from the customers nearby. When they returned home, Clara was waiting on the porch with a clipboard in her hand and a strange look on her face. She stepped down to meet him as he parked the truck and opened the passenger door for Eli. "We got a letter," she said quietly, this time with a return address. Noah's stomach turned. "From who?" She handed him the envelope. The handwriting was elegant, almost too neat, and the address was from 3 towns over. Inside was a letter written in clean cursive, unsigned, but dense with information. The writer claimed to be a former colleague of Walter Green, a man who once belonged to the same secret preservation group. He said the vault had been meant as a holding site for only 10 years, long enough to wait out political unrest. It had never been intended to become a permanent tomb for what was inside. He warned that not everyone involved in that original plan had agreed to let the treasure go silent. Some had gone on to seek profit, others had vanished. A few had made it their life's work to recover what was lost, believing the wealth and artifacts should belong to those who could put them to use. The letter ended with a line that chilled Noah as he read it aloud. "The vault you found is not the only one. There are others, and not all of them have remained hidden." Clara looked uneasy. This isn't about just one stash anymore. This is about a network. Noah folded the letter and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket. "Which means it's bigger than us." That evening, they stood side by side in the barn, where they had moved some of the less sensitive contents for cataloging. Clara had converted the far corner into a workspace with lighting and tarps. Several wooden crates sat open, revealing coins, old manuscripts, and small sculptures. She held a glass orb in her hands, studying the etched patterns within it. Noah watched her for a moment before speaking. "If you wanted to leave," he said, "I would understand." She did not look up. "I am not leaving." "This is not your problem," he said. She turned to him then. "It became mine the moment I walked through your door and saw what was under those walls. You don't get to do this alone, Noah." The air between them felt different now, not just charged with anxiety or fear, but something else, something heavier. She moved closer. He reached out instinctively and touched her hand, the one not holding the orb. Her fingers curled around his. "I used to think my life would never move forward again," he said. "After Hannah died, after everything fell apart, I figured I'd just exist long enough to raise Eli and hope I did it right." Clara's voice was soft. "You don't have to just exist." "I know," he said. "Not anymore." Their moment was interrupted by a sudden loud knock on the front door of the house. Not tentative, not curious, forceful. Clara stepped back. Noah dropped her hand and headed for the house, heart pounding. He opened the door to find a man standing on the porch, late 50s, clean-shaven, wearing a beige suit and polished shoes that looked ridiculous on the muddy wood. He held a briefcase and a business card already extended. My name is Gregory Lang, the man said. I represent an interested party with ties to the Green estate. Noah did not take the card. Who are you really here for? The man's expression remained polite. I would like to speak with you, privately. Clara appeared behind Noah before he could answer. She crossed her arms. We are not interested in offers, she said. I am not here to make one, Gregory replied. I am here to deliver a warning. You are not the only ones who know what lies beneath this land, and some of those who do will not be as polite as I am. He turned and walked away without another word. They watched his car disappear down the road. Noah shut the door and leaned against it. The war had begun. Not the kind with weapons and borders, the kind with whispers, secrets, and claims to stories that were never theirs to begin with. And it was no longer just about gold or history. It was about the future they had stumbled into, and whether they could protect it before it was torn apart. The next morning broke with a brittle stillness that felt unnatural. The birds were quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant to stir. Noah stood on the porch with a mug of lukewarm coffee, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the beige car that had vanished the night before. Clara had already started inventorying the smaller artifacts, typing notes into her laptop in quick, clipped bursts of focus. Her energy had shifted. She was no longer just cataloging a historical find. She was preparing a defense. Noah felt the same pressure tightening in his chest, the kind of pressure that reminded him of hospital waiting rooms and courtroom doors. He had seen what people were willing to do for control. He knew how quickly decency fell apart when power entered the conversation. There were sharks in the water now. The letter from the so-called former colleague had changed the shape of things. And Gregory Lang, whoever he truly represented, had confirmed it. Clara stepped outside and joined him on the porch. She had tied her hair up and tucked a pencil behind one ear. She held her phone out to him. "Take a look," she said. He glanced at the screen. It was an email sent to Clara's business address. The sender had used a proxy service to hide their identity, but the message was short and unmistakable. "I know what you found. You are not safe." Noah swore under his breath. "That's the third one," she said. "Different wording, same threat. The messages are escalating." He stared down the road. "How long before someone tries to take it?" "We need a secure location," Clara said. "Someplace to move the most valuable items. The vault is safe for now, but if someone decides to break in, we will not have time to respond." He nodded. "I'll call the lawyer." But before he could reach for his phone, Eli came running around the side of the house, barefoot and breathless. "Daddy," he said, eyes wide, "come see what I found." Noah was already moving, instincts sharp. He followed Eli to the overgrown path that led toward the back of the property. It twisted through tall grass and brittle brush until they reached the edge of a collapsed structure. What had once been a greenhouse now lay in ruins, its wooden frame rotted and its glass panes shattered long ago. Ivy covered most of the roof, and weeds had clawed their way through the broken floor. "Be careful," Noah said quickly, reaching for Eli's arm. The boy pointed at a dark patch near the center of the ruins. Something flat and rectangular was half buried beneath the soil. Clara had caught up by then. She crouched and pushed back the dirt with her hands, revealing the edge of a stone slab. It was too perfect to be natural. Someone had placed it there deliberately. They cleared the area in silence, a strange kind of reverence settling over them. The slab was heavy, but movable with effort. Together, they shifted it aside, revealing a trap door made of iron and oak. There was no handle, just a notch where a key might go. Noah stood slowly. "Another one." Clara nodded. "Looks like your grandfather built more than one vault." They returned to the house to retrieve the bundle of old keys from the desk. It took time, and several tries, but eventually one of the rusted keys turned. The lock gave a metallic sigh and clicked open. Noah lifted the door carefully, revealing a short drop into a stone-lined cavity. It was not as deep or large as the first vault. This one resembled a chamber or hidden room. Inside were 3 trunks, each sealed with wax and labeled with faded calligraphy. Clara stepped in first, flashlight cutting through the dimness. She unsealed the nearest trunk and slowly lifted the lid. Her breath caught. Paintings, dozens of them, stacked carefully, preserved under cloth and layers of paper. The edges were gilded, the strokes vibrant even through the dust. She pulled one free and held it up to the light. It was a portrait of a young woman in a blue dress, painted in an unmistakably classical style. "These are originals," she whispered. "Museum pieces." Noah opened the second trunk. Inside were sculptures, some marble, others cast in bronze, religious artifacts, ornate chalices, icons. They were not just old, they were sacred. The third trunk contained letters, some handwritten in German and French, others typed, all catalogued and dated, stamps from war-torn countries, correspondence between collectors, museum curators, and military officers. The trail of how these items had come to rest here was clear, if not yet complete. They stood in the chamber in silence, absorbing the magnitude of it. "We have to report this," Clara said eventually. "We cannot keep these here. This is not gold or paperwork. These are priceless cultural objects, stolen from homes and churches and museums." Noah nodded, the truth heavy in his chest. "And if we report it, we lose control." "I know." They sealed the vault again and covered it with the stone slab. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Clara contacted Rhea, who immediately began coordinating with a repatriation office in Washington. Legal and ethical obligations moved faster than ownership claims. Once word got out, it would be nearly impossible to prevent a federal investigation. Noah barely had time to process it before more news arrived. A story broke online late that evening, a leaked photo of one of the gold bars. The caption was vague, but the article hinted at a second location, more artifacts, an expanding mystery on the green property. Noah's name was included. So was Clara's. Within an hour, his phone rang non-stop. Reporters, curious relatives, strangers with wild theories. One message accused him of trafficking stolen war goods. Another offered to buy everything for cash. Another threatened to burn the house down. By nightfall, the first television crew had arrived. Noah refused to speak to them. Clara did too. They turned off the porch light and locked every door. Eli slept through it, blissfully unaware, his dreams protected by the quiet rhythm of rain now falling again. Noah stood at the window long after midnight, watching the headlights of parked cars pulse on the wet gravel. Clara joined him, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red from too little rest. "I didn't come here to become famous," he said. "You won't be famous," she replied. "You'll be a target." He nodded. "Already am." She touched his arm. "Then we decide what to do next. Together." There was a knock at the back door. Not hard, just 2 quiet raps. Noah froze. Clara's fingers tightened on his sleeve. He moved to the door slowly and opened it a crack. A woman stood there, older, with a wide-brimmed hat and a leather coat soaked through. Her eyes were the same blue-gray as his own. In her hand, she held a sealed envelope. "I think I'm your sister," she said. Noah did not speak. She handed him the envelope. "He left me a letter, too. About the house, about the vault. I think he wanted us to meet." Clara stepped forward. "Who are you?" The woman looked between them. "My name is Miriam, and I think we have a lot to talk about." Noah opened the door wider and let her in. The air shifted around them, not with danger, with something else. Family, and more secrets, the kind that waited patiently in the quiet, ready to be found. Rain pattered gently on the tin roof as Miriam sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. She had declined coffee, saying it made her anxious, and had instead chosen peppermint from the stash Clara kept for long nights. Her coat hung from the back of her chair, dripping quietly onto the floor. and her eyes drifted from object to object, as if cataloging every item in the old farmhouse like she had studied it 1,000 times from a distance. Noah sat across from her with folded arms, trying to match her calm. The envelope she had brought lay unopened between them. It was addressed to Miriam Green, in the same unmistakable handwriting Noah had seen in the letter from the vault. Their grandfather's script was clear and steady, even after all these years. Miriam had already told him her story, at least the broad strokes. She had been born to a different mother, a brief and quiet relationship Walter Green had kept hidden from most of the family. Her mother had died when she was young, and Walter had arranged for her care from a distance, providing money, guidance, and eventually letters explaining his past. He had never visited, never made promises, but had left enough behind to shape her understanding of who he was. She had not come to claim anything, she said, only to see the house, meet the half-brother she had only learned about a year ago, and understand the pieces of her past that had never quite made sense. Noah believed her. Mostly. He had seen enough deceit in the last week to know the difference between sincerity and performance. Miriam seemed steady, grounded in a way that suggested a life of solitude and long-held questions. Her eyes carried the weight of someone who had stopped expecting answers, but had come anyway, just in case. Clara stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the rain. She had barely said a word since the introductions. Noah could feel her processing, drawing lines between the timing of Miriam's arrival and the explosion of attention on the property. The trust they had built over the last few days remained, but it now felt suspended, like something balancing on a wire, waiting for wind. Noah reached for the envelope and slid it toward Miriam. "You should open it." She nodded and pulled at the seal with delicate fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed but clean, covered in dense handwriting. She read it slowly, eyes scanning with quiet intensity. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly and placed it back on the table. "He wanted me to come when the time was right," she said. "He never said what that meant, only that I would know. I guess this is it." Noah studied her face. "Did he say anything about the vaults? Or what's in them?" Miriam shook her head. "Only that they were part of something bigger than any of us. He said they were meant to protect what others tried to destroy." There was a long pause. Then Clara turned from the window. "We found a second vault." Miriam looked surprised. "When?" "Yesterday," Noah said. "Behind the collapsed greenhouse. More artifacts, paintings, religious pieces. We haven't gone through everything yet, but it's different from the first vault. More fragile, less about wealth, more about meaning." Miriam absorbed this quietly. He always believed art told a better truth than money ever could. "Do you want to see it?" Clara asked, her tone careful. Miriam nodded. "Yes, but not yet. I want to understand the people who found it first." They spent the rest of the morning talking. Eli wandered in halfway through and immediately took to Miriam, who surprised everyone by pulling a crumpled bag of caramels from her purse and offering one with a wink. He accepted it like it was gold, then settled at the table with a pad of paper and his crayons. At one point, he looked up and asked Miriam if she had dreams about the circle symbol, too. She paused before answering, then said no, but maybe someday she would. Noah watched them carefully. He did not want to admit how quickly Miriam's presence had begun to feel familiar. She had his mother's eyes, the same way they crinkled when she smiled, the same soft edges in her voice. He had not thought about his mother much since she died, not in a way that held weight. But now, with Miriam sitting across from him, it felt like someone had opened a door to a part of the past he had boarded shut. Later that evening, Clara pulled Noah aside while Eli and Miriam played cards in the living room. She closed the door behind them and lowered her voice. "I heard back from Rhea. She contacted a representative from the European Cultural Repatriation Council. They're sending someone next week, discreet, at least for now. But if the paintings match any of the stolen registries, it won't stay quiet long." Noah leaned against the wall. "Do we have a choice?" "No," Clara said. "But we can control how it plays out. she suggested, making a public statement. Voluntary cooperation, transparency. If we present ourselves as guardians, not owners, it shifts the tone. He sighed. And the gold? That's a separate legal battle, but one step at a time. He nodded. We should tell Miriam. Clara hesitated. Do you trust her? He thought for a moment. I don't know, but I want to. That night, as they cleaned up after dinner, Noah asked Clara to join him outside. They stepped into the cool air and walked the perimeter of the house in silence. The sky had cleared completely, stars blinking above like scattered pieces of an unsolved puzzle. The house behind them glowed with soft light. Inside were secrets, blood ties, and the fragile beginnings of a new shape to their lives. Noah stopped near the porch and turned to her. This was never supposed to be a home, he said. It was a mistake, a broken thing I inherited and figured I could patch together. Clara smiled slightly. And now? Now it feels like the only place that makes sense. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded sheet of graph paper, smudged and marked with pencil lines. He opened it and held it out to her. She took it carefully and unfolded it. It was a rough sketch of the farmhouse, expanded and rebuilt. New wings, a greenhouse restored, a proper front porch, upstairs bedrooms, a wide kitchen filled with windows. A design that mixed history with future, decay with growth. He met her eyes. I don't have a ring, and I'm not asking anything big. Not yet. But I want this, with you. She looked down at the drawing, then back at him. Her voice was quiet. You're asking me to build something with you. Yes, he said. She folded the drawing and tucked it into her coat. Then let's build. They kissed under the stars. Not rushed or desperate. Slow, steady, like the beginning of something built to last. And inside, Eli drew something new on the back of a cereal box, a symbol with 4 rays instead of 3. One for him, one for his father, one for the woman who had become part of their story, and one more, for the future still waiting to be discovered. Noah stood at the base of the grandfather clock in the corner of the living room, staring at it with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The clock had been there since the first day he stepped inside the farmhouse, a relic of dark wood and brass, its face chipped but its hands still moving. It had not struck a chime in weeks, even though it ticked on faithfully, always a second or two too slow. He had passed it dozens of times while carrying boxes, leading Eli by the hand, or following Clara as she mapped out renovation plans. But today he looked at it differently. Eli had been the one to bring it up that morning. Over a bowl of cereal, he had said, almost offhandedly, I think the clock has something inside it. Noah had asked why. Eli shrugged and said he had seen it in a dream again, the one with the glowing circle and the underground rooms. A voice in the dream had told him the clock was the last door. It sounded like nonsense, the kind of fantasy a child would invent to make sense of the chaos unfolding around him, but Noah had learned better than to ignore Eli's instincts. He ran his hand along the frame of the clock, feeling for a seam, a latch, anything unusual. Clara stood nearby, watching with a quiet patience. Miriam leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. No one spoke. They all seemed to understand that this might be another moment like the others, when something absurd became real. Noah pressed on the lower panel, and it gave slightly beneath his fingers. He leaned in closer, then felt around until his hand brushed a hidden catch near the base. He twisted it, and with a soft pop, the panel sprang open. Inside was a shallow compartment. At first glance, it appeared empty, but as he reached in, his hand closed around something small and cold. He pulled it out. It was a key, bronze, aged, and unusually ornate. The handle was carved into the shape of a starburst, the same symbol Eli had drawn the night before, 4 rays extending from a central circle. Clara took it gently from his hand and examined it. This isn't decorative. It's functional. It's meant to open something. Noah looked at her. But what? They thought it might belong to one of the vaults they had already opened, or to a chest or cabinet tucked away in the house. But when they retraced their steps, nothing fit. Every known lock had already been opened. Every drawer had been emptied. Every trapdoor and hidden space had been found, or so they thought. They returned to the kitchen and sat in silence. The key sat in the center of the table. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting long rays through the windows and across the faded wallpaper. The house was quiet. Even Eli, who usually filled the silence with humming or bouncing, was still. It was Miriam who broke the silence. "What if it's not for something inside the house?" she said. "What if it's for something on the land?" Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "There are acres we haven't searched yet, especially past the orchard, and the terrain gets rough." Noah nodded. "I haven't set foot past that line of trees." They packed supplies and set out after lunch, leaving the house under lock and key. Eli stayed behind with one of the trusted neighbors Clara had come to rely on, someone unaffected by the gold fever sweeping through town. The walk to the edge of the property took nearly 30 minutes. The orchard had gone wild over the years, fruit trees tangled with ivy and shrubs, roots pushing up from the earth like skeletal fingers. Beyond that, the woods grew thicker, less managed, their paths narrowed to barely visible tracks. They pushed forward, the late afternoon sun mottling the ground beneath the trees. After another 10 minutes, the trail opened into a clearing. At its center stood a stone structure no taller than Noah's chest. It was circular, built of carefully stacked stones, capped with a slab that bore the same starburst symbol as the key. Lichen covered most of it, but the pattern was unmistakable. Noah approached it slowly. "This wasn't on any of the maps," he said. Clara knelt in front of the stone and brushed the surface clean. There was a keyhole carved into the side, barely visible unless you were looking for it. She glanced at Noah, then slid the key in and turned. A low grinding sound followed, deep and heavy. The top of the stone slid open with a slow hiss, revealing a narrow shaft that descended into the ground. A ladder, rusted but intact, led down into the darkness. They hesitated, each of them exchanging glances. Then Noah climbed down first. The shaft opened into a dry, cool chamber. Smaller than the vaults, it felt less like a storage space and more like a time capsule. At the far end of the room was a table, and on it sat a single object, a wooden box. He approached it slowly. Clara and Miriam followed him down and joined him at his side. The box was locked, but this time the key was already inside. Noah turned it and opened the lid. Inside were documents, deeds, titles, maps, stock certificates and land rights, bonds sealed in plastic. A letter sat atop them, written in Walter Green's hand. Noah picked it up and read aloud. "To whoever opens this last door, know that I did not build these vaults for greed. I built them for preservation. This land sits atop something far more valuable than what you found in gold or art. It sits on energy, natural gas, reserves buried deep. I bought the rights in secret before the companies came. I kept them here so they could not be stolen or corrupted. Use them wisely. Let them lift this town, not destroy it. Let them be a beginning." Noah looked up from the letter. They began going through the contents one by one, slowly realizing what they held. The land, under the farmhouse, under the fields and trees and forgotten greenhouses, was part of a network of gas reserves. Contracts signed decades ago had secured mineral rights that had now become immensely valuable. Walter Green had not only hidden treasures from the past, he had invested in the future. Clara's voice broke the silence. "This could change everything. For the town, for Eli, for everyone." Noah nodded. "But it has to be done right." They carried the documents back in silence, heads spinning with the weight of what they now held. That night, as the sun dropped below the hills and dusk poured into the sky, Noah stood on the porch with Clara and Miriam beside him. Inside, Eli had fallen asleep with a book in his arms, the pages dog-eared and creased. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence felt earned. He looked out at the land, now pulsing with possibility, not just because of what it could give him, but because of what he could finally give back. A future, a foundation, a second chance. He turned to Clara. It's not about the vaults anymore. She took his hand. No, it's about what we build on top of them. And together, they watched the night settle in, no longer afraid of what secrets might be buried in the dark. 1 year later, the farmhouse stood unrecognizable from what it had been the day Noah first arrived. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by smooth cedar siding stained a warm honey brown. The roof was new, the windows wide and bright, and the porch had been rebuilt with sturdy steps and iron lanterns that glowed softly each night. There were flower beds now, wild and colorful, and a winding path that led around to the back, where a large greenhouse stood once more, no longer collapsed but full of life. Inside, the house hummed with quiet energy. The living room had been converted into a gallery space on one side, displaying a rotating collection of restored pieces recovered from the vaults. Curated with help from cultural preservation, experts, and legal teams who had helped repatriate what belonged to others. Every item left behind now had a purpose. Some were on loan to museums. Others had been returned to families. The rest had found their place in the house that once hid them. Noah sat at the dining table with Eli, who was carefully folding the pages of his homemade book. The cover was drawn in crayon, with bold block letters that read, "The Farmhouse That Saved the World." Inside were stories he had written about the treasure, the secret doors, the dreams he had that turned out to be real, and the people who had come and gone. His spelling was uneven, his sentences filled with run-on excitement, but Noah found it brilliant. Across the room, Clara and Miriam were finalizing the presentation for that evening's community event. The town council had agreed to fund a new school wing using a portion of the mineral profits from the gas reserves. Noah and Clara had made good on their promise to lift the town, not just themselves. It had not been easy. The legal hurdles had been immense, the scrutiny intense. But they had stayed steady, building everything piece by piece, agreement by agreement. The town had changed along with the house. Once skeptical and suspicious, the locals had begun to accept that Noah had not come back just to claim a fortune. He had given freely, invested carefully, and shown up at every town meeting to answer questions. When people doubted him, he stayed. When they asked for help, he offered it. Eventually, they began to believe in what he was building. Clara walked over and sat beside him, handing him a list of names for the donor plaques that would go outside the new library. Her fingers brushed his, lingering just long enough to remind him of what they had grown into. Their relationship had not exploded with drama or grand gestures. It had deepened like roots, slow and strong, taking hold of the life they now shared. "You nervous?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. "I haven't spoken in front of that many people since. Ever." "You'll be fine," she said. "You tell the truth. That's more than most people do." He smiled, took a breath, and looked out the window toward the fields. Miriam entered the room carrying a tray of drinks and snacks. Her visits had become more frequent since her first arrival, and she now split her time between her home and the farmhouse. She had taken a position as a historical advisor on the documentary project being filmed about the vaults. The woman who had once appeared on the doorstep with a letter and a mystery had become family in a way Noah never could have anticipated. As the sun began to dip, people started to arrive. The community gathered in the newly built barn, now renovated as a shared event space. There were strings of lights hanging from the beams, tables of food, and chairs arranged around a low wooden stage. Eli ran back and forth between his friends, waving his book and announcing that he would read from it if anyone wanted to hear a story. When it came time for Noah to speak, the barn quieted with a kind of reverence. He stood on the stage with a single microphone and looked out at the faces before him. A year ago, many of these people had watched him with skepticism. They had whispered about failure, about greed, about curses that came from inheriting ruins. But now he saw something else in their eyes: curiosity, gratitude, maybe even respect. He cleared his throat. "I came back here because I had nowhere else to go. I thought I was fixing up an old house. What I found instead was a life I never expected, a community that needed healing, a past that needed reckoning, and a future that, somehow, still had space for me and my son." He paused, glancing at Clara and Eli in the front row. This house held secrets, yes, but more than that, it held potential. And what we do with that potential is what matters most. We didn't find treasure, we found responsibility, and we chose to share it. The crowd clapped, not thunderously, but warmly, genuinely. Afterward, the night moved into laughter and conversation. The local band played a few songs, and the children darted through the crowd with glowing bracelets and cookie crumbs on their cheeks. Clara danced with Eli under the soft lights. Miriam stood by the refreshment table, deep in conversation with one of the museum curators who had flown in from the city. Noah stepped outside for a moment to breathe. The stars were bright again, the kind of bright you only saw in places with open land and fewer distractions. The farmhouse glowed behind him, no longer a shadow but a beacon. He had not expected any of it. Not the love, not the family, not the buried fortune that had revealed itself in more ways than one. He walked back inside to find Eli standing on stage with his book open. "And then," Eli said, reading with care, "we found a key in the clock, and it opened the last secret. But the real treasure wasn't the gold or the paintings. It was the people who didn't give up, the ones who stayed and helped and made everything good again." Noah felt his throat tighten. Clara slipped her hand into his, and for a moment the world went quiet again, not in warning, not in fear, but in peace. They had taken what had once been dismissed as junk, a ruin of forgotten stories and rotted wood, and turned it into something new, something strong. They had built a life out of what was left behind, and they were just getting started.